Doctor Who has been officially a waste of time since 2018, and quite honestly, I'm surprised I convinced myself watching this episode would be a good idea. Then again, it's not like I could have gone out and partied instead. It's strange to think that the last time I was discussing the latest Doctor Who episode, the pandemic was only just hitting headlines and life was relatively normal. I am nostalgic for such a time, and yet this very nostalgia was played on for the most detrimental effects in this episode. Let's begin where this all started, the trailer. I actually thought the idea of the Doctor being in prison was the best thing the show could bring to the table. She has undoubtedly accumulated countless enemies over thousands of years, and this made for an understandable and interesting area of exploration. Unfortunately, this idea got thrown to the wind 18 minutes into the episode, but we'll get to that later. Jack returning was also another interesting element to throw in, but still was quite the overdue return given how little he contributed to Series 12 as a whole. More importantly, if Jack were to be in this episode, the story would have to answer a very vital question. What is left in Jack's story to be told? After appearing in 4 series of the show and 4 series of Torchwood, the answer would appear to be very little. We then saw the most aggravating element of the trailer, that of the Daleks returning as security drones. Their appearance outside number 10 immediately brought to mind the episode Victory of the Daleks, which I've reviewed over on my Patreon page. This idea alone set the bar very low, as though expectations weren't low enough already. Going into this, I was expecting a very typically insulting story with a cameo and a few nice ideas that would be tossed out very quickly. All these expectations were met.
Nothing's changed.
The episode began with a reminder of what happened during 2019's New Year's special. It was accompanied by this obnoxious orange text displaying 6 hours and 7 minutes later, as though the precise amount of minutes were important. Spoilers, they weren't. We were shown a lorry driver who seemed to do the government's top secret waste disposal, and a government figure who appeared to downplay the murder of a civilian or two.
We had an accident. People got hurt.
Yet strangely showed concern for this driver's mother. We even see 3 photographs of the mother taped and blue-tacked to the inside of his truck. This did look a bit weird and only seemed to establish that somebody would miss him if he was gone. It was when the driver stopped for tea that I first felt a total disconnect with the episode. Not that I could expect precognition on behalf of the writers and producers of this show, but just seeing tea being served without face masks or social distancing, paying with cash. God, even those Comic Sans stickers made me feel quite ill. At least she was wearing rubber gloves, I guess. I did think it rather disappointing how quickly these poisoning shenanigans took hold. It only took 1 second to make this cup of tea and then was gulped down a few seconds afterwards. I know that some tea drinkers' tongues are more accustomed to hot boiling water than my own, but geez, at least let it brew for a minute or two. The biggest problem was how flawlessly this lady's plan of assassination went. Say this driver was an actual human being and drove off with his cup of tea and crashed on the M25 after taking this big gulp. Was she just going to pack up shop and follow him until he drove off the road? After the titles, we met 3 of the key human players in this story. Joe Patterson, Prime Minister in the making, Leo Ragazzi, the head of a vague tech company called Ragazzi Industries, and the least desired returning character of the show thus far, Jack Robertson. I think there must have been a little confusion in the Bring Jack Back memo.
Sorry, old man.
A few meters away, a protest was taking place. According to Robertson, this was just a small role play, which immediately threw confusion into the mix. If this wasn't a real riot, these actors must be getting paid a huge wad of money to be deafened or have bricks and Molotovs thrown at them. Maybe Robertson meant to say demonstration, but apparently there wasn't enough money for a revision of the script, given that the episode's budget was £2.70. I get that this riot riot was supposed to reflect a general sentiment about society in the modern era. We would only find out at the very end of this segment that this fake riot was taking place inside a facility of some kind. This just off the A12 location didn't quite look as though it would belong in a scientific facility. I was so baffled that a member of cabinet and two very wealthy businessmen weren't protected in any way by, say, a projectile that accidentally flew too high. The trap-infused music might have worked in The Mandalorian, but it sure as heck didn't work here. All these people pointing and laughing mirrored my own experience sitting on the couch. I actually didn't mind the water cannon and CS gas in terms of design, but it was the fact that we had Curtis from Misfits describing exactly what we could see on screen.
Built-in water cannon, CS gas.
Suddenly, the trio had ear protectors as well, seemingly spawning those out of nowhere. In the following scene, we got some answers about everything that had taken place thus far. Even though we established the connection between the Dalek truck hijack and this demonstration, Ragazi Industries seemed to be a one-man band.
You built this yourself?
Oh, pretty much.
In minutes, this character's CEO status was completely thrown out of the window. CEOs are generally at the top of a hierarchy of people, unless Ragazi Industries is just another word for an acting troupe. Later on, we saw the Companions reuniting in that other TARDIS where Yaz had been accumulating a plan to find the Doctor. I didn't mind this scene too much, to be honest. Yaz has had so little development over the years, and it seemed like her investigative police side was finally being put to good use. She even remembered Jack Robertson's name, because I certainly didn't. The problem was that the Doctor's rescue plan got hijacked by the Dalek issue. Why would our sweet old man Graham be the guy who found leaked footage of a Dalek on the internet? Has he learned how to use a smartphone in the 10 months that they've been waiting for the Doctor? Then we got to the part I was most excited about, the Doctor being in prison. That sounds kind of morbid, but it's true. We first saw her moping around in a cell, scratching and eating cake. Literally 5 seconds after the cake materialized, this weird Xbox 360 red ring of death thing told her it was time to exercise. And by exercise, I mean walk down a corridor and greet some cameras. Evidently, she didn't have much in the way of company. I did find it strange that she woke up every morning with damp combed hair, but I guess this was done to make her look good for the trailers and my thumbnail. The same can be said of this room that all the prisoners went to for exercise. This was the first nostalgia baiting we saw in this episode, as an Ood, Weeping Angel, and Sycorax appeared. Though I really don't know who would be nostalgic for Pating aside from Ryan.
The mighty Pating.
I was most disappointed that despite them opening the Doctor Who costume and prosthetics wardrobe, they didn't even bother bringing out any Jadoon. You'd think this place would be swarming with them, but apparently electric fences do the job just fine. The episode sped through this montage rather quickly to cut out the monotony of the Doctor's everyday existence. I personally would have liked to have seen more of this to make her escape a bit more rewarding. Instead, they repeated the same cell to exercise room routine with another nostalgia jab with the silence.
I forgot you were here.
How could you possibly forget if you're doing this same routine day in and day out? This was where she ran into Captain Jack Harkness, who apparently waited 19 years to get into the cell next to her. This also meant that the Doctor had been in prison for at least 19 years. Yet apparently her hair stayed the same length the entire time. More importantly, how did she manage to re-dye her hair? Surely those roots would be a bit more visible after at least 19 years. I honestly think that all hopes for this episode disappeared when Jack broke her out, limited though they were. Not to say Jack wasn't a welcome sight, I just didn't know why they bothered putting the Doctor in prison if she was just going to break out in less than 10 minutes of screen time. It made that scene with Yaz in the other TARDIS completely null and void. All it now indicates is that Yaz missed the Doctor more than any of the other companions, which isn't nearly as interesting to me. Important details were also left out, not to mention how extremely convenient and contrived this escape plan was. Firstly, the convenience.
Rumor you were in here, so I committed a few crimes.
You heard a rumor from who. This is important because if it was from somebody trustworthy, Jack would have motivation to act on said rumor. If not, why would he bother? This is also important because he will need to know what the Doctor looks like. In Jack's previous episode, he never even saw the Doctor's female incarnation. What if she'd regenerated again? How does he know what to look for? And now the contrivance.
One secretly stashed vortex manipulator.
How did you manage to smuggle that in here?
You really want me to answer that?
But that's a compact laser deluxe. Where were you hiding that?
You really don't want to know.
Man, what a great idea putting the Doctor in prison was. What a shame it is that
Everything else is just horror.
a year on from the demonstration, Robertson and Joe met up in some woodland area. Don't these people have offices?
Budgets are falling. How many hours till you get the results from the ballots?
The numbers are on my side.
Why do we even need this scene? We know she's going to become the Prime Minister, why not just confirm it here? This scene hurt my eyeballs as well though because it's lit so horribly. This establishing shot made it look as though there were sun rays coming through even though it was raining, and these lens flares from the car headlights were just disgusting. This scene only seemed to represent Robertson as being this corporate punching bag who doesn't pay any taxes again. In the very next scene, the companions showed up out of thin air to have an encounter with Robertson. This added confusion to an already vague set of locations in the plot. The show never actually confirmed where exactly this house TARDIS landed on Earth, so for all I know, it's a short walk away from wherever Leo's lab is. What I want to know is how they found him so easily. It's nighttime now as well, so it would have been nice to have a little information as to what the fam got up to in those hours. After some cringeworthy interrogation tactics, the gang was surrounded by security.
Get rid of them, boys.
Did you just assume your security guard's gender? We then had a scene where Robertson bullied Leo about being a genius. Once again, these scenes felt very awkward as it gave the impression Leo was the only person seen working for Ragazi Industries. Don't you have anybody working for you that can incinerate this thing for you? Not that it would have mattered anyway. It also gave the impression that Leo could just create AI to program the Daleks and also clone alien octopuses. Is he a programmer or a biologist? I don't doubt it's possible to be both, but it just seemed so convenient that he could do all this stuff alone. I did like that Nathan Stewart Jarrett was able to bring a bit of creepiness to his performance, treating his creation with adoration. That idea got ditched the moment his ear got clipped though, and only the weakest of remorse was heard.
I'm sorry.
Then the terrible back-hugging Daleks idea was brought back. It was a terrible idea 2 years ago, and it's been recycled again because the budget of this episode was £2.70. This really should have been the point that I turned the episode off. Unfortunately, curiosity killed the cat. The Doctor and Jack then made it straight into the TARDIS easy peasy. This sad piano music trying to emphasize the emotion of this reunion didn't work at all, given how little time on screen she spent in prison. Jack's complaint about having a TARDIS suite was nice, but then we got the lone Cyberman tie-up. A 3-part finale amounted to 10 seconds of, yeah, we sort of sorted it. Doesn't that just demonstrate how impactless these stories are? Bad patterns in the narrative just seem to keep popping up. The lone Cyberman issue was hijacked by the Timeless Child stuff. The Doctor being in prison was hijacked by the Dalek stuff. I find it so saddening how original ideas get thrown aside like this in this era. The fam were then seen back in Sheffield, where we had the most needlessly epic return of the TARDIS. This return just had Aliens of London vibes written all over it, except here it wasn't anywhere near as effective given how little most of the gang had actually done during her absence. Maybe if one of the companions had been stuck with her, it might have been more interesting. Suddenly the episode took us to Japan, where a whole facility of Daleks were being grown. Leo claimed to have known nothing about this.
What is this place?
Yet more details were required than what we were given to make this scenario believable. This octopus that was stored in a lab in the UK somehow managed to hire out an entire building in Osaka to store and create more octopuses. Fortunately, answers to these queries were given later in the episode, but did not produce satisfying results. The TARDIS gang then separated into two groups, one to interrogate Robertson and and another to visit the Dalek lab in Japan. The Doctor said this,
Looks like he's recently opened a facility in Osaka.
which made it fairly unclear whether she was talking about Robertson or the Daleks. More on that later. The TARDIS then managed to find Robertson as magically as the fam did earlier. How are they finding this buffoon so easily? More importantly, where is this 3D printing facility? It's in the Prime Minister's constituency, I can tell you that much.
I want them built and beta tested in my constituency.
Yes, as discussed.
The Doctor then just blocked the phone lines because she said so in the most obnoxious way possible. Robertson then simply caved into her demands and showed her the warehouse of Daleks. What happened to all that secrecy and security surrounding this stuff established in the beginning? Meanwhile, in Osaka, well, if you're good at pretending, this might look like Osaka. It just looked rather dark, gloomy, and empty for the second most densely populated city in Japan. Jack and Yaz had a chat about the Doctor abandoning her companions. I feel like this theme has been explored to death already, but one of the smaller problems with this scene was hearing Jack talk about the Doctor as though she were a male, and Yaz didn't say a thing. Maybe she knew about the Doctor's gender fluidity already. It just seemed a bit strange that the show was trying to make this deep attachment between her and the Doctor, but she didn't mind that Jack called her him. The scene did end rather strongly, with Jack bringing this yin and yang attitude with regards to traveling with the Doctor.
Enjoy the journey while you're on it, because the joy, it's worth the pain.
He's evidently had enough time to mature and settle on this idea, but the scene was spoiled by what happened right afterwards. Jack blew a hole in a door with his squareness gun, and we didn't even get to see Yaz's reaction to this, at least not in focus anyway. The biggest gut punch was her line right afterwards.
Are you feeling insecure? Because you seem to need a lot of praise.
You've only been around this guy for what, 30 minutes tops? And I swear this line was generated just for the trailer. The end of this scene was totally bizarre too. We literally saw this reveal 5 minutes earlier, and to think that we're now only halfway through this episode. Oh. Then we had a fake news montage. This is probably the most insulting part of the episode for me for a variety of reasons. Let's start with my own personal grudge against this style of filmmaking the show adopts. I totally acknowledge that it's legally necessary to show context for a fictional news report. They do exactly this at the very end of this episode. In the case of my complaints directed towards episodes in the Davies era, my problem isn't its necessity, it's that the camera is often pointed closer to the screen than needed for dramatic effect, and it looks horrible. It looked horrible then, and it looks even more horrible now, given that I'm rewatching episodes of the show that are over 10 years old on a spanking shiny HD screen. When seeing this news report of an actor enacting the role of the Prime Minister, I was honestly expecting a cut to another selection of actors watching the TV too. I'm guessing it was just cheaper to remove the headline bar at the bottom of the screen to get around the context issue as opposed to filming a family watching it. Definitely wouldn't want to see this lot again, for example.
The Wi-Fi's gone off.
We'll have to have a conversation.
What?
Another reason why this segment drove me insane was because this was the point at which horrible inconsistencies within the writing bubbled up to the surface. We saw a montage of the Daleks amongst the general public, displaying reactions varying from unacknowledgement to adoration. To make matters worse, the Doctor only previously said this.
To billions of people, Dalek means hate.
Despite the Brits being depicted as behaving otherwise, and even further back in the episode we had this line.
I can be killed, but I come back to life pretty quick. Partially her fault, partially a friend of hers on Earth called Rose, but she's trapped in a parallel universe now.
It's incredible how Chibnall will pick and choose elements from a comparatively more successful era of the show for nostalgia purposes and simultaneously overwrite it and pretend that it never took place. Then we got a strange segment with Jack Harkness once again conjuring gadgets out of thin air. Maybe, just maybe, the Doctor took took Jack on a trip to collect his iconic jacket and these little bomblets, which might have been nice to see. We might have seen him secretly picking them up behind the Doctor's back. It would also just join the dots a bit and not make this moment feel totally impulsive on the part of the writer. Back in the TARDIS, the Doctor and Ryan had a little heart-to-heart. It truly got off on the wrong foot though, as the Doctor stumbled in the attempt at finding a good quality within Ryan's character.
You do love a beanie. One of the first things I noticed about you that night we met. I thought not everyone can carry off a yellow beanie. There's a lad to rely on.
Was this meant to be some kind of joke?
4 minutes to Osaka.
What? You can travel anywhere in space and time in seconds, yet in this instance, it takes you 4 minutes to materialize halfway across the Earth? Why? This was the throwaway line you chose to create this vacuous conversation with your soon-to-be leaving companion? The conversation just felt like an awkward water cooler catch-up, and it was painful to watch given that we had experienced the Doctor's pain alongside her. It just seems to be insisting that the reveal in The Timeless Children wasn't just some hiccup or a script written on a bad day, but that we'll have to accept it whether we like it or not. I don't know if this is necessarily a bad thing, but I just don't like being bashed over the head as though I completely forgot what happened in the previous episode.
What I always knew to be the story of my life isn't true. I wasn't born on Gallifrey.
Why not play some sad piano music over the top of this scene to make sure we are feeling the correct way about this moment too?
While I was locked away, all I kept thinking, if I'm not who I thought I was, then who am I?
That's it? For 19 years, you were in the same confused mental state as you were throughout Series 12?
Nothing's changed.
I truly hope that the Master reappears in the next series and just says, "Your origin story? I made that all up just to fuck with you." Ryan's suggestion of finding out more about her origins is precisely the antidote the show needs, but given the dire quality this era has proved to be thus far, I predict that this direction will do more harm than good. It felt like an admission of the timeless child being an undercooked idea, but the main thing this scene did was to highlight how Ryan was more of a marionette than a real, breathing human being, and that the Doctor's problems are more important than his.
And how do you feel about that?
Mostly
shit. Then everyone arrived at the Osaka growth plant, and once again every line of dialogue just made my head spin. Remember this?
Looks like he's recently opened a facility in Osaka.
Here we got confirmation from Robertson that he had no idea about any of this.
Where did you get the purchase order numbers in the first place?
This was a very valid question that deserved an answer, but then Ryan said this.
Really? That's what's bugging you most right now?
And that was the end of that line of inquiry. This scenario was absolutely unbelievable. I know we're dealing in the realm of science fiction here, but if you're going to set the episode on 21st century Earth, you have to at least give us some semblance of reality. The Doctor then literally just regurgitated the dialogue from the lab scene earlier as though she was psychic or something. Then Leo the Dalek made the case that he inserted himself into every network, which sounded a bit sexual, but there was more.
I located this place, created it, every piece of equipment, every idea behind it. I did that.
He would later go on to say that he used our systems for the labor end of things, i.e. construction, equipment deliveries, etc. Firstly, why would this character feel the need to tell a bunch of people he's literally just met all this nonsense? Secondly, these explanations are all so vague. A rich guy buying a giant building in Osaka doesn't sound unreasonable, but it's on the human end of things that it started getting ridiculous. Once the workers had completed their tasks, they were melted down and used for clone feed. Quite a horrific idea, but this seems to have happened for months or maybe even a year or two without the Japanese authorities raising their eyebrows over missing people. So the episode got 1 point for the subtle lighting change throughout this scene. It was a nice technique, but unfortunately the lighting itself was reminiscent of overly lit segments seen in the Davies era. The lighting change's purpose was apparently to start up the next series of Robot Wars.
3, 2, 1. Activate!
Because the Dalek in Resolution used UV light to activate itself, which I totally forgot about. The music in this scene didn't support anything dramatic either. They seemed to play this bland and serviceable score for mood as opposed to truly amplifying emotions or elevating drama or anything. Then in predictable fashion, the Daleks turned bad. I was a little disappointed that the Daleks' weapons just became their lethal lasers with a red tint. It might have made for great comedy, seeing them spraying everyone with water, or even raining CS gas from the skies to produce a uniquely terrifying experience. The PM then got her comeuppance in as cringy fashion as you can imagine. People were literally dying in the streets, and she just boiled it down to teething issues, coming out of number 10 with her smartphone in her hand. Not one person filming or photographing her took any issue with this, despite paparazzi being notorious for berating public figures when scandals arise. Then we had the most hilarious sight of the Daleks suddenly appearing in front of the Prime Minister. I mean, look at her face.
This is some sort of a joke.
Then the Doctor called up a genuine Dalek fleet in order to eliminate the newly built ones in Britain. It was quite strange that the Doctor and Jack recognized them as Death Squad Daleks, even though they looked like ordinary Daleks to me. I honestly wouldn't have complained if the big fat colourful batch from Victory of the Daleks were used instead. They've ripped so many plot points from that episode already, why stop there? Well, thank God there's a pub to hide in right here where we can have a nice cold pint and wait for all this to blow over.
How's that for a slice of fried gold?
It was pretty incredible that this flood of Daleks flew out of their ship and didn't see the TARDIS materializing on top of this bridge. I was pleasantly surprised watching Robertson separate himself from the fam right here. There was some great mocking dialogue from the Daleks, who were more concerned with destroying their own than conquering the Earth. Even Robertson used the word Dalek here, despite ridiculing its usage earlier in the episode. His slimy attempts to reclaim power and betraying humanity as a result were effective, if a little contrived. I honestly thought that we would be seeing him negotiating with a unique Dalek leader. The "take me to your leader" line was so charged with potential, but sadly didn't have the payoff it deserved. Instead, the leader was just a normal golden Dalek with a deeper voice. Even this premonition of Jack and the boys dying in a blaze of glory to destroy the Daleks sounded like a great idea. Instead, we got this. The TARDIS then got spotted by the Daleks hovering in the sky. I genuinely thought that this trap the Doctor set was rather innovative, given that another TARDIS and a picture-perfect hologram of the Doctor had both been previously established. This flood of Daleks going into the TARDIS made for quite the spectacle, as did the destruction of the TARDIS itself. The only problem is that another aspect of the show got thrown to the wind here. So many episodes in the past have dealt with this idea of the TARDIS being a living being, yet the Doctor just programmed one to kill itself? Then suddenly Jack Robertson was in line for a knighthood for saving the world? This jump from TARDIS to TV interview was so jarring. Didn't this guy fund the company that made the security drones that killed several people? It was amazing how the Doctor let that man evade justice twice in one episode. We had the hint from Graham to turn off the TV because the final 10 minutes are literally just saying goodbye to him and Ryan. Graham, I can understand a bit more because Ryan is the member of the gang he's closest to. Fair enough. But Ryan, Ryan. I think he was probably more put off by the idea of a meringue restaurant than anything else. He's leaving to firstly be with his mates, of which we've really only seen one, and secondly to fight for his planet because it needs him. How exactly he'll achieve this latter goal is left fairly blank, and I found Yaz's crying to be totally unconvincing.
Bye, fam.
Good night, Ducky. Ta-ta!
I have to say, it's no wonder Ryan kept falling off his bike with Graham constantly shouting at him and making him look over his shoulder. All this reminiscing did nothing but make me laugh.
We fought Cybermen, Skithra, Morax. The mighty Pating.
That's my favourite. I've got that on a t-shirt.
And what that bit with Ryan's grandma showing up was about, I have no idea. Maybe the line about sun being in their eyes was a metaphor for them moving on from grief, even though the sun was behind them. I honestly haven't a clue. I was much more open to the prospect of it just being Yaz and the Doctor until they announced that this dude would be joining the crew. Genuinely thought it was Hugh Grant at first. One can dream, I suppose. So, did it suck? I thought it'd suck, and it did suck. I'm sorry you had to sit through all that, but there was just so much wrong with this episode. Jack's inclusion almost made it bearable, but again, none of the ideas here were developed enough to put meat on the bones of this story. Some of the parts of the final wrap-up were enjoyable, but honestly, the good parts are fleeting at best, and the rest was just bloated with awful, nonsensical, cringy, insulting crap. I give Revolution of the Daleks a 2 out of 10. Thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, please consider supporting these videos over on my Patreon page. What did you think of this episode? Comment below your thoughts or join us for a chinwag on my Discord server, where we'll continue this discussion. Maybe the line about... Oh wow. Thank you for the interruption, Mr. Ambulance.